Good morning, everyone. We know that in Jewish law there are various laws about mourning for relatives, God forbid, on the passing of a parent or a sibling or a child, God forbid. But what's interesting is there are no laws about mourning for a best friend. In this week's Torah portion, Moshe Rabbeinu loses his brother and his sister. Both Aaron and his sister Miriam pass away in this week's Torah portion. And not only did he lose his brother and his sister, but he lost, in effect, his best friends. So much so that Miriam was the one who protected him when he was in the Nile and watched over him. And as a result of this, he is in tremendous grief. And in this frustration and sadness, when the Jews provoke him, he has very little patience for them. And therefore the verse says, Miriam, the sister of Moses, dies, and the Jews quarrel and complain about the lack of water. And Moses, in his anger, strikes the rock to produce water, and ultimately God punishes him because he was told to speak to the rock and not to hit the rock. And the lesson, obviously, is that in life sometimes we turn to anger because we don't have the calmness and the patience to deal with other people when they provoke us due to our own circumstances. But what the Torah tells us is that we always have to keep life in perspective. And one of the ways we keep life in perspective is through the mitzvah of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer, in this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, we're told how one who is unclean becomes contaminated, defiled. And you have to take the ashes of a red heifer, mix it with water, and sprinkle it on the person to cleanse them. And the question is, what is the meaning behind this mitzvah? Although it's super rational, what would be the rational explanation for it? Perhaps. And one of the explanations given is that ashes represents the very end of a process. When something dies and it's completely destroyed, all that's remain is the ashes. Water, on the other hand, represents the beginning of the process of life. When a baby is born, a baby is in water. Water is the beginning of all growth in vegetation. So mixing the water with the ashes represents mixing the end process with the beginning process. In other words, what it's saying is that when there's an end, it's also a new beginning. Every sunset brings about the potential for a new sunrise. And so the idea of the person who becomes defiled when losing a loved one is that, unfortunately, the sadness and the grief and the pessimism that sets in when losing a loved one, the despair, could lead to a contamination of the mind and the heart and the emotions spiritually. And therefore mix the ashes with the water, representing new birth and new life and new beginning. And something that was very inspiring just the other day was after the tragic shooting on July 4th, when the parents of this little 2-year-old boy, Aiden, the mother and the father, Kevin and Irina, were shot. And this boy was left an orphan at 2 years old. Someone set up a GoFundMe page with a goal to raise $500,000 for this boy to have some money to live his life and be taken care of without his parents. And in less than 24 hours, as of yesterday, there was over $2.5 million raised. Today, it's already over $3 million. And that is the idea that in life, we should never allow, even, God forbid, tragedy, to cause us to become set and paralyzed with grief and sadness, but rather realize that after the ashes comes the water. And that's really the story of the Jewish people time and again. Dinis in Israel with a group of women from the synagogue. When you walk through Israel, you realize how after the ashes of the 6 million of the crematoriums, of the gas chambers, the greatest tragedy known to man, the Jews went and got the pure water and began life again in the land of Israel, fulfilling a 2,000-year dream. That's the message of the Parah Adumah. We have to use this crisis and channel it into new beginnings in how our country deals with violence, with mental illness, and do not allow the ashes to remain permanent, but rather bring the water a new approach, a new way of living for all of us to prevent these tragedies from occurring in the future. Have a wonderful day.